With us on the Economic Times this morning, former Congressman from New York, Joe DioGuardi, and we're talking about the debt bomb, actually, as he calls it, speaking out across America now about this continually. And Joe,
you know, when I sent you that presentation at Wharton, if you noticed, the first slide on the PowerPoint was a bomb, and there was a fuse on that bomb. And guess what? We haven't mentioned a loaded word yet. And you can't talk about the debt without talking about interest. Mm-hmm. The fuse on that bomb is interest. And look what the Fed has done with quantitative easing 1 and 2, and now they're thinking about quantitative easing 3. What is that? That means printing money. You know, somehow floating more Treasury bills, or the so-called twist, you know, buying the long-term ones and selling the short-term ones to manipulate, I hate to use that word, you know, short-term interest rates versus long-term. But we've never had interest rates as low as they are right now. Therefore, the budget item for interest last year was only about $250 billion. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens when interest goes up, as it must? You have credit cards. I have credit cards.
Yeah,
See, the bank's not letting you off the hook. They still have interest rates between 15 and 20% on that debt. And God forbid people are relying on that to, balance their budget. They're in real trouble. That's how bankruptcy occurs.
Well, let's talk about some percentages here real quick. I want to ask you some quick questions so folks get some numbers in their head. Greece, what's the percentage of Greece's debt to GDP versus...
I wish that we had independent accountants giving me these numbers, but I do get the numbers as I read the press. And the number that was given in the last 6 months is about 150%.
And what does
that include? All the pensions that may or may not be included, recorded on the books? I don't know, because we don't have international accounting standards that are now comparable. We're going to have that soon, though, from what I see. But let's assume what I'm reading is correct. They've been advertising the fact that, and they think it's very dangerous, that Greece has debt that is 150% of its gross domestic product.
And what about America?
Well, if you look at just our Treasury bills, the debt that we know that is held by Americans, is held by the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund. Don't forget, we actually put Treasury bills in there when we take the money out. We borrowed that money and spent it on other things. And the debt that's held by foreigners, you're talking about that $15 trillion going on $16 trillion by the end of this year, because the debt ceiling is coming up. That is about 100%. Okay. But if you added in the debts or the obligations, as publicly traded companies have to do, they have to go out and get professional actuaries besides accountants who know what assumptions to make on growth and mortality rates and on what you're going to earn on the fund, and then you present value that, you come up with a number that is credible, and that number last year for Social Security was $8 trillion, and there was another $20 trillion plus for Medicare. So you're talking about a total of all these liabilities. I saw a number of about $35 trillion. You add the $15 trillion, the Treasury bills, you're up to $60 trillion, and that's 4 times, 400% the gross domestic product of the United States of America.
400% GDP to GDP, our debt to GDP.
Our debt and obligations on the books and off the books.
Now, let's look at in the last. Now, people will say, "Oh, the government doesn't print money." I remember a guy called me a couple years ago. In the last 3.5 years, the Treasury has increased its holding of U.S. debt. In other words, we've issued debt, and now we hold it. We're buying it back. 462% increase. Now, tell me what these numbers, 400% to GDP, 462% increase in we're holding our own debt, of the Treasury holding U.S. debt. What effect does that have on the value of our currency? When
you say the Treasury is holding the debt, I think what you're saying is it's the Fed.
Yes, the Fed. I'm sorry, the Fed, yes.
The Fed. Don't forget, the Fed is an independent group, and basically the balance sheet of the Fed has grown exponentially because it has printed money, and in many cases they monetize that in Treasury bills. So this is where Ron Paul comes in, and God bless him. Many people think he's an oddball, but let me tell you, he's a smart guy. He's not going to be president of the United States, and he is an expert on the monetary system and the gold standard and you name it. And he's been calling for an audit of the Federal Reserve System, the Fed's balance sheet. And I one-upped him on that. I said, yes, Ron, you're right, but let's not use government accountants to do that or auditors. Let's go out and get a consortium of the biggest accounting firms, pay them what they're worth because you get what you pay for. Hopefully we'll get it on a competitive bid and find out what the real numbers are. You're right. The Fed balance sheet has grown exponentially because of this quantitative easing.
Now,
and basically, it is...
well, they say it's a 462% increase in 3.5 years. Now, tell me, though, what is the effect on the value of our currency?
Well, if you... First of all, you got to look at what the effect could be in the future on inflation. Because if you're printing so much money and you're not productive, what happens is the bottom line on productivity is that if you have too much money chasing too few goods, you have inflation.
Right.
Now, as we see our production dropping and we see consumer confidence levels dropping, are we putting ourselves now in harm's way as we did back in the Carter days or the days leading up to the Carter administration where we coined that famous word stagflation?
The Fed is charged with the protection of the value of our currency and to manage our currency. And what I was trying to get to is there has not been a responsible or reasonable voice or leadership on doing their, upholding their primary responsibility in my mind. And, what they have allowed to happen here is ultimately we have devalued our currency, have we not? And put seriously, maybe historically, its value into question, right?
Yes, that's right. Now, I don't want to defend the Fed, but what do you expect when you have no fiscal policy? We haven't had a budget now for 3 years. The United States of America, this huge economy, the largest in the world, is operating, the government part of it, is operating without a budget. They have what they call a CR, a continuing resolution, just to keep it going. In fact, this could be the fourth year that we're not going to have an official budget. Yet, what have we done? We've increased the debt, as you just said, by about $5 trillion in 4 years. We've had trillion-dollar deficits, I think, for at least 3 of those years, well over $1 trillion. So what do you do in a case like that? You've only got two mechanisms to keep things moving. A car doesn't move without oil or gas. Well, if we don't have fiscal policy, which is taxing and spending, and a way to predict that so that you're budgeting what it is that the government is spending, and don't forget the government is a big piece of our economy, then the Fed is there to say, well, we can't just close shop. We got to make sure that we have enough money out there so that people can buy and sell goods. In the meantime, we got to try to keep interest rates down as low as possible so that people are not burdened with the fact that they're buying and selling, or we're going to keep consumer confidence or the ability of consumers to buy by keeping interest rates down. But that's what I said in your prior programs, that we've created an artificial economy, an artificial interest rate, and at some point it's got to go back, and that's the fuse on the bomb. Because once interest rates go up with all this debt that we've accumulated, and I'm talking about the debt that's on the books now, the $15 trillion in Treasury bills, just figure out if it goes back from where it is now at around 2% or less to 6, 7, or 8%, which was normal in prior years. The interest that gets into our budget goes from $250 billion to well over $600-700 billion. That money's going to come out of education, out of roads, out of things that we need, to keep people.
And it's going to come out of it's going to come out of the economy. People are going to lose their job. Businesses are going to close. Businesses aren't going to even think about hiring people. It's going to contract. It's going to go into a protective mode even further. The economy, is it not?
Absolutely.